He spent 22 years in solitary, then revealed what he heard behind the walls. Smash that subscribe button if you think you can handle the truth we're about to uncover. That was the only warning before the story of Marcus Hale began, a man who survived what most inmates and officers still call the quiet hell. For 22 years, he lived inside a cell barely wider than his outstretched arms, buried deep in a solitary confinement block in the Western Correctional Complex, a place known for housing the state's most volatile inmates, gang leaders, and those the system preferred to keep unseen. But what Marcus revealed after stepping out of that cell would force investigators, lawyers, and even state officials to reopen a case they thought was long buried. Marcus was 45 when he was finally released into general population. His beard was gray, his eyes sunken, and his voice low from lack of human interaction. He wasn't violent. He wasn't erratic. But he was cautious, constantly scanning the hallway, flinching at sudden noises, and refusing to sleep with the lights off. Officer Ramirez, who'd worked in solitary for 10 years, said Marcus was different from every other long-term isolation inmate he'd supervised. Most guys came out angry. Some came out broken. But Marcus, he came out like a man carrying something heavy. Like he'd been listening to something the rest of US couldn't hear. The first person Marcus spoke to wasn't an officer or a chaplain, it was Dr. Helena Brooks, a prison psychologist documenting long-term solitary cases. She had been interviewing inmates for months, and Marcus was at the top of her list. On their first session, she expected silence, confusion, standard re-entry trauma. But what he said instead made her pause her recorder. He said, "Doc, the walls in there talk. And nobody's listening." Marcus described nights when the block was so quiet he could hear inmates in the next units breathing through vents. But even stranger, he claimed he'd overheard conversations that shouldn't have been possible. Not inmate fights. Not screaming. Not delusions. Conversations between officers. Whispers. Arguments. Panic. Conversations about things that never made it into reports. At first, Helena suspected sensory deprivation hallucinations, so she pressed him. What exactly did he hear? Marcus leaned closer. There were nights when someone was being beaten. Not by inmates. By staff. I heard the names. I heard the threats. And one night, I heard something that didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like a cover-up. She froze. Cover-ups in solitary weren't unheard of, but rarely documented. She needed details. When she asked him for the date, Marcus shook his head. I don't know the date. But I remember the scream. It wasn't a man's voice. A chill ran through Helena. Solitary was for men only. So she pressed again. Marcus insisted, it wasn't a man. I know the difference. Word of Marcus's statement reached Warden Leland within 24 hours. Within a week, his interviews were suspended for mental stabilization. And 2 days later, the cell block where Marcus had spent nearly half his life was abruptly closed for maintenance. Helena wasn't buying it. Neither were two investigative journalists who'd been following the prison for years. And then something happened that forced everyone to pay attention. One afternoon, while reviewing old solitary relocation logs, Helena found a notation she'd never seen before: U-block transfer, one civilian detainee moved to medical holding, no further documentation. The date matched the period Marcus claimed he heard the scream. There were no civilian detainees. Not in solitary. Not in that prison. Ever. Helena rushed to Marcus with the finding. But when she arrived at his new housing unit, officers were blocking the door. Marcus Hale was gone. Transferred, they said. No explanation. No destination listed. And when Helena demanded to know why, the officer handed her a single folded slip of paper, something discovered inside Marcus's former cell. It was a note. A warning. 5 words. And when she read them, her blood ran cold. I wasn't the only one. The walls remember more than men do. Helena Brooks read the note again and again, each time feeling the same pressure at the base of her throat. I wasn't the only one. It was both a warning and a truth she felt she had been circling without fully seeing. If Marcus Hale had heard someone else inside the solitary block, someone who wasn't an inmate, then the entire foundation of the prison's internal protocols was a lie. And if Marcus had vanished without a trace, someone wanted him silent. Helena wasn't a detective, but she had something detectives often didn't: the trust of inmates. And the solitary block had recently scattered its residents throughout the compound after the maintenance shutdown. She knew some of them would talk, if she moved carefully. She first approached Devin Price, a former gang enforcer who'd spent 4 years in isolation and owed Helena a favor after she got him transferred to a safer unit. When she asked him whether he ever heard something strange in U Block, Devin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the wall, jaw tight. "You're asking the wrong question," he finally whispered. Helena frowned. "Then what's the right one?" Devin leaned closer. "Ask why U Block was sealed for 3 days after that riot in 2009. And why nobody was allowed inside. Not nurses. Not counselors. Not even the warden." Her breath hitched. That riot had been small on paper, minor disturbance, the official report claimed. 2 inmates injured, both stabilized. No deaths. But if the block had been sealed off, something wasn't right. Devin's voice dropped. "People say an inmate disappeared during that lockdown. A lifer named Turner. But there was never a death notice. Never a transfer. Just gone." Helena felt a pulse of fear. If Turner had vanished, and a civilian detainee appeared on the log soon after, the question wasn't who screamed. It was which one. That night, Helena used her access as a clinical psychologist to request archived camera logs from the 2009 incident. She expected resistance. She didn't expect the archive office to tell her that all U Block footage from that year had been lost due to a server malfunction. Convenient. Too convenient. She wasn't alone in her frustration. Michael Cole, an investigative journalist who had followed abuse allegations at the prison for years, showed up at her office the next morning. "I heard about Marcus," he said. "And I heard about the note." She didn't ask how he knew. With Cole, information traveled like electricity through wet wires, fast and dangerous. He opened his laptop and turned it her way. A leaked document glowed on the screen. Internal Notice, Special Handling Unit Protocol, Civilian Intake Procedures, Rev 2009. Helena froze. There were no civilian intakes. Cole nodded. "Exactly. But this protocol exists. And look at Section 4. She read it. Her hands trembled. "In the event of off-record detainee processing, all movement shall occur through U-Block Access Tunnel C. No documentation shall be generated except for internal oversight." Off-record detainees? A hidden access tunnel? And U-Block was the location. This wasn't just abuse. It wasn't just a beating or a cover-up. Something, or someone, had been hidden inside that block. Cole leaned back. Marcus heard something he shouldn't have. And someone realized he'd been listening for years. Helena swallowed hard. Then why take him now? Cole clicked to the next leaked page. Detainees with long-term auditory proximity risk are to be evaluated and, if necessary, relocated to prevent information cross-contamination. Cole tapped the page slowly. Auditory proximity risk. That's Marcus. Helena's heartbeat pounded in her ears. But the most disturbing part wasn't the protocol. It wasn't the tunnel. It wasn't the implication that civilians had been held inside a state prison without records. It was what Cole showed her next. A single grainy photo. Timestamp, 2 days before Marcus vanished. Marcus was walking down a hallway, flanked by 2 officers she didn't recognize. But behind them, at the end of the corridor, a door stood open. A door Helena had never seen on any map of the prison. A door marked C Tunnel Access. And in the shadows of that doorway, someone else was standing. Not an officer. Not an inmate. A silhouette frozen in the frame, watching Marcus with an unnatural stillness. Helena's stomach flipped. Cole whispered, "Whoever that is, they don't want this getting out." But before Helena could respond, her office phone rang. A trembling guard's voice filled the speaker. "Dr. Brooks, you need to come to the infirmary. Now." "Why?" The guard hesitated, then said the words that made her blood run cold. "We found something in the old solitary cell. Something with your name on it. The truth they buried in the dark." Helena moved through the prison corridors with a pace that bordered on running. The guard's voice still echoed in her mind, "We found something in the old solitary cell. Something with your name on it." When she stepped into the infirmary, 3 officers stood by the counter, faces pale. One held a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a folded piece of paper caked in dust from a cell that had been locked for over a decade. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly. C-tunnel wasn't for inmates. Her heart dropped. Before she could react, Cole hurried in behind her, nearly breathless. "They're moving something out of the prison," he said. "Trucks. No markings. Leaving through the maintenance gate." Helena looked back at the note. Marcus hadn't written it in fear. He'd written it to point her somewhere deeper. The access tunnel. The place where the scream came from. And the place where he'd been taken. She turned to the officer in charge. "I need access to U-block. Now." He hesitated. "Warden closed that entire wing." Cole stepped forward. "Then open it. Because if you don't, this becomes a federal case by morning." After a tense pause, the officer nodded. "Follow me." They moved through the deserted unit, lights flickering from years of neglect. The air smelled stale, untouched. When they reached the old U-block control room, Helena froze. C-tunnel access was on the map after all, just covered by a bolted metal plate. The officer unfastened it. Behind it, a narrow concrete stairwell descended into darkness. Cole whispered, "This is where they kept her." Helena flinched. "Her?" Cole nodded grimly. "The civilian detainee. The one Marcus heard. I found a whistleblower report from years ago. Someone claimed a protected witness was hidden here for temporary off-record containment, and never reappeared." Helena felt sick. If that witness was hidden unlawfully, if she'd been hurt, if people covered it up, this was bigger than Marcus. Bigger than any inmate story. This was criminal conspiracy. They moved down the stairs, flashlights cutting through the black. At the bottom lay a steel door, rusted and dented. The officer forced it open. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined with small, windowless rooms. The rooms weren't cells. They were makeshift holding rooms. No toilets. No windows. No documentation. Helena stepped into the first room and found a chain on the floor, broken at the clasp. In another room, a torn blanket. In the third, a faded ID card wedged under a loose tile. She lifted it with trembling hands. A woman's face stared back. Name, Elaine Mercer. A missing federal witness from 2009. Cole swallowed hard. She disappeared right after agreeing to testify about corruption in a private contracting firm tied to the prison. Helena felt the pieces snap together. Elaine was the scream. U-block was the hiding place. C-tunnel was the unrecorded movement route. Marcus heard her because he was in the closest cell for years. And whoever ran this operation feared that after 2 decades of listening, Marcus knew too much. Then the officer called out from the far end of the tunnel. "Dr. Brooks, you need to see this." They approached the final room, the only one with a reinforced door. Inside was a cot, overturned. Papers scattered. A water bottle. A set of shackles removed from the wall recently. And on the cot lay another note. Marcus's handwriting. "They moved me. But I saw the woman's file. She didn't die here. Someone took her out. She's still alive." Helena's knees almost gave out. Alive? After all these years? Cole grabbed her shoulder. Helena, look at the date. The note had been written 2 days ago. Meaning Marcus hadn't been silenced. He'd escaped the people who moved him. He'd found evidence. He was trying to expose the truth from the inside. Suddenly, the officer's radio crackled violently. Be advised, unidentified individual spotted near perimeter fence. Moving fast. Possible escapee. Helena and Cole exchanged a glance. Marcus. He had gotten out. The story wasn't ending, it was beginning. And as they raced back up the tunnel, Helena whispered the words she knew would haunt her long after the case was over. 22 years in the dark, and he still found the truth before we did. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, the walls of U-Block felt like they were breathing again. And somewhere in the night, a man who had heard everything was finally free to speak. If he survived long enough. Because the last line of Marcus's note burned in Helena's mind like fire. They're coming after me now.